Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I've read countless accounts of infidelity, stories of cheating husbands and wives, each with its own twists and turns. The responses to such betrayal vary widely because every individual reacts differently when faced with the ugly truth. Picture this. A husband unexpectedly arrives home to find a strange car in his driveway, instantly feeling that something is off. He enters the house, moving stealthily, his gut churning with unease as faint, suspicious sounds float down from the bedroom. He edges closer, finding the door slightly ajar, and what he sees inside confirms his worst fears. There, his wife is entangled with another man, her moans of ecstasy piercing through his disbelief. I've come across many versions of this scenario in these stories, and my issue isn't with how they're written, it's with the so-called men in them. Time and time again, these husbands or boyfriends, faced with such blatant disrespect, crumble. They stand frozen, overcome by nausea and shock, before slinking out of their homes to wallow in self-pity. These men retreat to bars, drowning their devastation in whiskey while agonizing over their next move. Eventually they return, feign ignorance, and plot petty revenge. Is this the behavior of a real man? I think not. To those spineless husbands who tolerate humiliation in their own homes, shame on you. You'd rather cling to the facade of a marriage than confront the betrayal unfolding before your eyes. Let me tell you how I handled it when my turn came to face this nightmare. Tiffany and I were married for 11 years, with 2 kids, Trevor, who was 10, and Jasmine, who was 8. For most of those years, I believed our marriage was strong. Like many young couples, our early relationship was passionate and adventurous. We explored our limits, even delving into one of the ancient Chinese lovemaking manuals. Out of 1,000 positions, 6 turned out to be worthwhile, while the rest seemed better left untried. Tiffany, particularly fond of being on top, found pleasure in taking the lead when I was too exhausted. I know this might sound blunt, but it's the unvarnished truth. Even now, bitterness lingers in my words, a residue of the pain I've tried to move past. Back then, like so many young couples, we lived beyond our means. We craved a lifestyle we couldn't afford, mirroring the comforts our parents had spent decades earning. This led us into debt, appliances we didn't need, a big screen TV we couldn't afford, and more. The financial strain wasn't just Tiffany's doing, I played my part too. To stay afloat, I worked 6 days a week at the factory. Even with the occasional profit-sharing checks, the economic climate was against us. Eventually, Tiffany suggested she take on a job, and though I felt a sting of shame for not being able to provide fully, I agreed. It was a step we needed to take to climb out of the financial pit we'd dug ourselves into. She began working at a department store. The job didn't pay much, but it fit well with the kids' schedules. However, her job came at a cost. The time we once spent together dwindled, and our once vibrant, intimate life began to fade. Tiffany often said she was too exhausted or stressed from juggling work and the kids. I understood. I felt the strain, too. Our arguments shifted focus, from money to household responsibilities. Tiffany demanded more help around the house, and while I tried to meet her expectations, I couldn't seem to get it right. I didn't mind helping, but I wanted to do things my way. This mismatch in expectations fueled frequent fights. Eventually, Tiffany began withholding intimacy, which I suspected was her way of punishing me for not measuring up to her standards. Feeling neglected and isolated, I started spending evenings at the bar when Tiffany was at work. I wasn't doing anything wrong, just chatting with a few women and occasionally buying them drinks. But word got back to Tiffany. She was livid, accusing me of pursuing other women. Her words cut deep. If I was going to cheat, she said, she could do the same. I assured her with all the conviction I could muster that the accusation was untrue. I swore on everything that mattered to me that whoever had spread the rumor of my infidelity was lying. But she refused to tell me where she had heard it, retreating to the bedroom and locking the door behind her. For a fleeting moment, I considered breaking the door down, but the thought of repairing the damage stopped me. Hoping her anger might subside by morning, I resigned myself to the couch for the night. Our relationship was crumbling under the weight of constant conflict. We argued about everything, big or small. Communication had completely fallen apart, and the word divorce had become an empty threat we tossed around far too often. Meanwhile, our children had started spending more and more time at Tiffany's parents' home, likely to escape the tension that filled ours. Their withdrawal was a painful reminder of how much damage our fighting was causing them. By Friday, I'd had enough. I told Tiffany I planned to take Saturday off to go fishing, hoping some time alone would help me clear my thoughts. Her response was sharp and immediate, accusing me of abandoning my responsibilities when we were already struggling financially. "What's wrong with you?" she snapped, sparking yet another argument that spiraled out of control. Later that night, her suspicions reached a new level. She accused me of planning to bring a woman from the bar on my fishing trip. I was shocked, struggling to understand where this absurd idea had come from, but she refused to elaborate. The accusation wasn't true, though I couldn't deny that a woman at the bar had recently been a little too forward with me. I had enjoyed her attention more than I should have, and while I hadn't acted on it physically, I couldn't pretend my behavior was entirely innocent. She had flirted and once even grabbed me, which I didn't stop quickly enough. Still, I'd made it clear to her that while my marriage was struggling, I wasn't going to cheat. Saturday morning, I packed my fishing gear and headed out, desperate for some peace and clarity. Alone in nature, I found the solitude I needed to reflect. 4 hours of quiet brought the truth into focus. Tiffany and I had been locked in a destructive cycle, neither of us willing to listen or compromise. If we had any hope of salvaging what we'd built, it was time to stop the endless arguing and start communicating honestly. But when I returned home, something felt off. A car I didn't recognize was parked in the driveway. My instincts screamed that something was wrong. Quietly, I entered the house and listened. Then I heard her voice. "Anthony, this isn't right, even if Ben is cheating on me." My stomach clenched at her words. Peeking into the living room, I saw them. Anthony had his hand on Tiffany's chest. Her blouse hung open, her bra pushed up. A surge of rage blinded me. I stepped into the room, and Tiffany's eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God, Ben, what are you doing home?" she stammered. "This isn't what it looks like," she added, though those words only fueled my anger. Without hesitation, I grabbed Anthony and yanked him off the couch. His pant zipper was undone, and my fury exploded. I drove my fist into his stomach, then landed a solid punch to his jaw, sending him crashing into a table and knocking over a lamp. Still seething, I pounced on him, delivering blow after blow until he was barely conscious. Standing over him, I finished with a brutal kick to his groin. Tiffany's screams were distant, barely registering as I unleashed my rage. I grabbed Anthony by the collar, dragged him to the front door, and threw him outside. Turning to Tiffany, I spat, "You're nothing but a whore!" before shoving her out as well, her blouse still hanging open. Slamming the door behind them, I locked it, ignoring her frantic pleas to talk or call an ambulance for Anthony. Moments later, the house was bathed in flashing red and blue lights. A patrol car and an ambulance had arrived. Officers pounded on the door, threatening to break it down if I didn't open it. Reluctantly, I unlocked it, and they stormed in, ordering me to lie on the floor. One officer pressed his knee into my back as they cuffed me. Outside, paramedics loaded Anthony into the ambulance, his battered body limp. Tiffany sobbed as she hastily buttoned her blouse and adjusted her bra. And there I lay, face down on the floor, cuffs biting into my wrists, wondering how everything had unraveled so completely. They questioned Tiffany to gather her account of the events. I, however, kept my silence. When the officers read me my rights, I refused to utter a single word. They escorted me to the back of a patrol car and drove me straight to jail. Tiffany didn't stop at just making a call. She even came down to the station in person. Once I arrived, I firmly told the officers that I had no interest in speaking with her. It was one of the few rights I still had, and I intended to exercise it. Joe, one of the officers on duty and a decent guy, approached my holding cell for an informal conversation. "Ben, seriously, what went down here?" he asked, leaning against the bars. "Lack of communication," I replied dryly. "That's what happened." I laid it out plainly for him. I walked in on my wife preparing to sleep with another man. On my couch, no less. I'm not the kind of guy to just stand there and let something like that happen. So, I acted. Joe raised an eyebrow. Have you heard her side of the story? Joe, let's not complicate this. She wasn't forced into anything. She was ready and willing. What kind of man would I be if I stood by and allowed it? I did what I thought was right, and now I'll deal with the fallout. I had no intention of spending money to bail myself out. My family needed those funds far more than I did at the moment, so I resolved to stay put. I figured I'd let the state assign me a lawyer and use the time to cool my head while things settled down. Not long after, Joe returned with a letter from Tiffany. I flatly refused to read it. When I eventually met with my court-appointed attorney, he didn't sugarcoat the situation. I was in serious legal trouble. His advice was blunt. He suggested I plead insanity. I chuckled at the absurdity. I knew exactly what I was doing, I said. And if that guy shows his face around Tiffany again, he'll get the same treatment. The lawyer gave me a hard look. Do you even realize how bad this was? You nearly killed him. Broken jaw, fractured ribs, black eyes, the works. He's in no shape to give a statement. The police had only Tiffany's account to go on. My lawyer planned to speak with her directly. Anything you want me to say to her? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Tell her she can sleep with whoever she wants now, and tell her I want a divorce. From that point on, I shut down emotionally. The hardened exterior prison required became my new norm. I refused to see or speak to Tiffany, even when she tried. Messages from my kids filtered through. They missed me and wanted me back, but I couldn't simply walk away from this as if it hadn't happened. 2 months dragged by and the pretrial hearings began. Tiffany and the guy, Anthony, as I now knew, were the central witnesses. When I entered the courtroom, Anthony was wheeled in on a wheelchair. His leg, broken when I'd thrown him out the door, was in a cast. His jaw remained bandaged, though most of the bruising had faded. My lawyer leaned over and whispered something that stunned me. Anthony's injuries had been worse than I thought. His testicles had been so severely damaged, they required surgical removal. He'd never fathered children. The fallout in Anthony's personal life was just as devastating. His wife was divorcing him over the whole ordeal. With his jaw wired shut, most of his statements had been submitted in writing. As I turned toward the courtroom doors, I caught sight of Tiffany standing there. A storm of emotions surged within me, anger, betrayal, and hurt. Though she hadn't wanted to testify, the court had compelled her to give her version of events. She wouldn't have to testify directly against me, but her account would still be presented. Anthony was called to the stand first. He testified in court that Tiffany had invited him over and that their encounter had turned intimate before I barged in unprovoked and attacked him without giving him a chance to defend himself. He claimed that he and Tiffany were consenting adults and argued that I had acted impulsively, attacking him without hearing any explanation. As he spoke, my anger flared, and I wrestled with the temptation to strike him all over again. Had the opportunity presented itself, I might not have held back. Tiffany, her face streaked with tears, shot him a furious glare before glancing my way. When it was her turn to speak, she told the court that she and Anthony were colleagues. She recounted how Anthony had persistently flirted with her, despite her constant refusals. Recently, Anthony had approached Tiffany, alleging that her husband, me, was unfaithful. At first, she didn't believe him and even confided in me about his claims. But one day, Anthony arrived with photos, one showing a woman placing her hand on my back. The moment I saw the image, recognition hit. I had seen Anthony lurking near Jake's bar, a place I frequented for drinks. He'd never spoken to me, always staying at a distance. Now it all made sense. He had been surveilling me, capturing those photos to exploit the situation. Tiffany continued her testimony, her voice heavy with emotion. I was devastated when Anthony told me about the supposed affair. He suggested that I retaliate by doing the same thing. I felt lost and confused. Her voice wavered. I love Ben, but anger can make you irrational. I confided in Anthony about Ben's upcoming fishing trip, and he claimed he'd overheard Ben inviting a barmaid to join him. That accusation cut deeply. Maybe I wanted revenge, I don't know. I was just so humiliated. Tears welled in her eyes as she recounted the events of that Saturday. Ben left without even saying goodbye. Our kids were spending the day at my mom's, so I was alone, drowning in my thoughts about what he might be doing. Then Anthony showed up. He said he thought I could use company since my husband was betraying me. Her tone sharpened with anger. That man set me up. I let him in because he was in a wheelchair. I didn't think he was a threat. I made him a coffee and we started talking. But then Anthony began to flirt. He unbuttoned my blouse and pulled my bra down. Tiffany buried her face in her hands. I didn't want him. I wanted Ben, but I froze and let it happen. When he leaned forward and unzipped his pants, I finally told him to stop, saying it wasn't right, even if Ben had cheated. Her voice cracked as she described my arrival. Suddenly, Ben stormed into the room and grabbed Anthony. I was terrified he would kill him, and I'd lose him forever. I screamed for him to stop, but he was uncontrollable. He threw Anthony out of the house and then turned on me, calling me awful names. He shoved me out the door, too. She paused, her voice trembling. Minutes later, the police arrived with an ambulance. Anthony was taken to the hospital and Ben was arrested. I tried to talk to Ben after that, but he wouldn't listen. I was so foolish, so unbelievably foolish. As she stepped down from the witness stand, her tear-filled eyes met mine. Her pain was undeniable, but so was mine. She insisted nothing like this had ever happened before and claimed it wouldn't have gone any further. Yet the damage had already been done. I sat there, helpless, amidst the ruins of Anthony's deceit. When it was my turn to speak, I made the critical error of admitting I'd act the same way if given the chance. The court found me guilty of assault and battery. Despite the incident taking place in my home, the judge ruled that Anthony was a guest, and I should have asked him to leave rather than resorting to violence. The conviction came with a 4-year sentence. Tiffany left the courtroom in tears, and we never spoke again. Alone in my prison cell, the weight of everything I'd lost pressed down on me. I decided to write her a letter, needing to express the feelings I'd bottled up. Dear Tiffany, I love you. I've always loved you. I need you to know that I never cheated on you. If you drop by the bar and speak with Sue, I'm sure she'll tell you everything honestly. My lawyer is preparing to send over the divorce documents shortly. You're far too beautiful a woman to face the world on your own. We both made serious mistakes, ones I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Perhaps if we had communicated better, things might have turned out differently. I should have been a better man, and I could have been. But now it's too late to change the past. Please let Trevor and Jasmine know how much I love them. It's heartbreaking that their father ended up being labeled a criminal. I couldn't just sit idly by and watch events spiral out of control. That's not the kind of person I am. My greatest regret is that you couldn't trust me and chose retaliation instead of seeking understanding. I truly hope you find someone who brings you happiness. Please move forward with your life and let me remain in your past. The divorce papers will arrive soon. Forever yours, Ben. I had signed the divorce papers and given Tiffany everything we had owned together. In my current reality, material possessions held no value. Here, food and clothing were provided, so I didn't need anything else. My days were spent waiting. My past as a laborer hadn't prepared me for much, so I signed up for self-improvement courses to prepare for life after this place. I joined a welding class, a skill I'd tinkered with before but never mastered. This seemed like my shot to create a better future once I regained my freedom. At night, my thoughts drifted to my family, my children growing up without their father, and Tiffany finding her way alone. The weight of it all was crushing. About 2 months into this bleak routine, a guard told me I had a visitor. I assumed it was my lawyer coming to finalize the divorce. The prison had 2 visitation options, one with glass panels and phones, and another where visitors and inmates sat across tables face to face with minimal physical contact. To my surprise, I was directed to the latter. Sitting at the table, waiting for me, was Tiffany. The moment our eyes met, tears welled up in hers. "Hi, Tiffany," I greeted her cautiously. "What brings you here?" Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I don't want a divorce," she said, her eyes glistening. "I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes." I was taken aback. She continued, her words spilling out in a rush. "There's no one else I want but you. I made a terrible mistake when I doubted you. I'll never make that mistake again. I know it's hard for you to trust me after everything, but I didn't let things go too far. I was so consumed by guilt, Ben. In some strange way, I was almost relieved when the truth finally came out." She wiped at her tears and pressed on. "Our lives are in shambles now because of both our actions. I take full responsibility for my foolishness in not believing you. I even met Sue, you know. She told me how much she cared about you and how she tried to get closer to you. But she also told me how you turned her down, saying you were happily married and couldn't betray me." Her tone grew sharper, more emotional. "I told Sue everything, about Anthony and the photos. She was livid. She even said she'd like to kill that man for what he did." I softened, steering the conversation away. "How are the kids? Are they doing all right?" "They're coping as best they can," she answered with a weary sigh. "I couldn't keep the house, though. We're selling it. For now, we've moved in with my parents. The sale closes next week. I've put all our furniture and your belongings in storage. When you're out, we can start over." Her tears fell freely now. "I'm so sorry for everything. I miss you every day, Ben. I can't do this alone. I love you." "I miss you too, Tiffany," I said, my voice unsteady. "But you have to live your life. I can't ask you to wait for me. 3 years is a long time." "I've already made up my mind," she replied with conviction. "I'm not getting a divorce. I'll wait for you." "If you still want a divorce after you're out, I'll sign the papers, but not before," she said with determination. We spoke a little longer, and before I left I asked the officer if I could kiss her goodbye. She kissed me softly, tears streaking her cheeks. She promised to visit every month, but I told her it would be too painful each time she had to leave. We settled on her visiting once every 3 months instead. Prison life moved forward. My kids sent letters about once a month, full of updates on their lives. Sometimes they included photos. One in particular, a snapshot of them with their mother all smiling, became precious to me. I hung it on the wall of my cell, where it served as a bittersweet keepsake. To keep myself occupied, I threw myself into learning welding and grew quite skilled. My instructor even promised to provide a job reference when I was released. True to her word, Tiffany visited every 3 months. She reassured me that things were going smoothly. She had started working as a department manager at a new store, earning a slightly higher salary. Her parents were pitching in to help her rebuild her life. I couldn't help but ask how her parents felt about me, considering I was now a convicted felon. "They still love you, Ben," she replied. "They know your temper got the best of you. They were upset with me for not communicating better, saying I was losing a good husband because of my mistakes." She went on to share that when the divorce papers arrived, her parents had asked what she planned to do. "I tore them up in front of them," she said with a faint laugh. "They actually smiled." About 6 months later, I was notified of another visitor. This time, instead of the usual tables, the meeting was set up at the glass partition. Confused, I approached, unsure of who to expect. To my shock, Anthony was on the other side, holding the phone receiver. "What the hell are you doing here?" I barked. "I thought I'd let you know I'm keeping my word," he said, a smug grin on his face. "What are you going on about?" I asked sharply. "Your wife, her profession," he sneered. "I started it, and now I'm going to finish it. You know we're seeing each other, right?" My rage ignited. "You lying piece of garbage! When I get out, you're a dead man, you hear me?" He laughed. "Maybe I'll send you some pictures of me and her together. You could put them up on your wall next to the family photo." Fuming, I growled, "When I find you, I'll end you, you sick!" He cut me off with another laugh. "You won't catch me. Take care, Ben." With that, he hung up and walked away. I slammed the receiver down, my chest heaving with anger. Just as my life was beginning to feel stable, that snake had to crawl back into it. I didn't believe Tiffany was involved with him, but I knew I had to warn her. Phone calls were expensive and restricted, but I scrambled to place one anyway. When I finally got through, Trevor, my son, answered enthusiastically. "Dad! Hey, Dad! How are you? I miss you so much!" "I miss you too, buddy," I said, my voice briefly softening. "But I need to talk to your mom right away. Can you get her? It's important." "Okay, Dad. Hold on. I heard him calling for her. Mom, Dad's on the phone. He says it's urgent. Then, faintly in the background, I caught the sound of her startled voice followed by a shout. Ben? Is that you? What's going on, honey? She asked, her voice thick with worry. She knew I wouldn't call unless it was something important. Have you talked to Anthony recently? I asked, my tone careful. Anthony? She snapped, her voice instantly sharp. No, Ben. Not after everything he's done to us. I can't stand the man. Why are you bringing him up? He came by earlier, I explained, my voice strained. Said you and he were seeing each other. That's a lie. A damn lie, Ben. How could you even think that? She exclaimed, her voice trembling with anger. I believe you, Tiffany, I said firmly, but I think he's up to something dangerous. He might try to hurt us, and he could use you to get to me. Please, stay alert and protect yourself. I don't have a solid plan yet, but I can feel he's trying to settle some score. I'd rather die than let that bastard near me, she spat. Don't worry, I can take care of myself thanks to you. And the police won't help. They never act until it's too late. I'll be fine, but promise me you'll stay safe too. I need to go now, Ben. I love you, Tiffany, I said softly, realizing there wasn't much else I could do at that moment. Without any evidence, stirring the pot could only make things worse. Over the next few nights, I hardly slept. A week passed without incident. Then, while I was at work, a man approached my table. Ben, I'm Lieutenant Scott, and this is Officer Ryan, he said, flashing a badge. We're from the sheriff's office. What's this about? I asked, immediately wary. 3 days ago, Anthony Trexler was found shot to death near a bar. It's being investigated as a homicide. Were you aware of this? Scott asked, his tone steady. This is the first I'm hearing of it, I replied calmly. Do you own a firearm? Scott continued. No, I said plainly. I was jailed because of that man, Lieutenant. I couldn't have shot him even if I wanted to, and Tiffany would never allow a gun in our house. Scott's eyes stayed fixed on me. Records show Anthony visited you last week. What was his reason for being here? He came to gloat, I explained. Wanted to remind me of the mess he made of my life. Just digging up old wounds for his own satisfaction. Do you know anyone who might have wanted him dead? Scott pressed. I let out a bitter laugh. I couldn't care less who did it. Honestly, the world's better off without him. But if you need suggestions, check with his ex. She had more than enough reasons to hate him. Scott's voice shifted, probing further. What about your wife, Tiffany? Would she have a motive? I laughed outright at the idea. Tiffany? Not a chance. She's the kindest person I know. When I beat Anthony up that one time, she was the one begging me to call an ambulance. She's too busy raising 2 kids and juggling life at her parents' house to plot a murder. She doesn't have it in her. Scott leaned back slightly, studying me. Thanks for your time, Ben, he said. Wait, I called after him. Are you going to tell me anything useful about the case? You know everything we do, Scott replied curtly. Fair enough. Later, I pieced together the story from the whispers making their rounds. Anthony had shown up at Jake's bar around 7 p.m. that evening. He ordered a drink and sat for a while before stepping outside to meet a woman in a revealing dress. She stayed near the door and didn't enter the bar, so no one got a clear look at her face. They walked together through the parking lot, and moments later, 2 gunshots shattered the night. When people rushed outside, Anthony was lying dead, 2 bullets from a Luger, right to the face. The woman was gone. Suspicion clung to her name like a shadow, but nothing concrete could tie her to the crime, aside from the unsettling possibility that she had been the last person to see him alive before the fatal gunshot. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. He probably deserved what he got, I told them, though my insides churned with a desire to call Tiffany, to reassure her the danger had passed. Still, I stayed silent. What if someone was listening? The shooting made the news, but the investigation was stalled. Though my name came up, thanks to a brutal fight I'd had with him before, I was cleared. My alibi held up. A week later, Tiffany visited, bringing a warmth I hadn't felt in months. Did you hear about Anthony? She asked. I recounted my police interview, and she admitted they had questioned her too. Her airtight alibi, work records, and her parents' testimony had erased any doubt about her innocence. Did they ask about guns? I asked. They did, she replied. I told them what you drilled into me years ago. We don't keep guns in the house. Do you know where my Luger is? The one we got from that shady dealer? I pressed further. It's probably in storage with your other things, she said with a steady calm. What matters is you're safe. That's all that counts. Prison had given me endless hours to think, to hope. When I get out, do you think we can leave all this behind and start fresh? I asked hesitantly. Her expression softened, and her voice carried reassurance. Of course we can. No more lies, no more walls. Just us, being real with each other. I love you, Ben. I always have, and I always will. Months passed, and then one day, the warden summoned me. His words were almost too much to believe. I was getting an early release, in just 2 weeks. Joy surged through me. I called Tiffany immediately. Can you come pick me up in 2 weeks? I asked. You mean visit? She asked, sounding puzzled. No, I replied with a laugh. Not visit. Pick me up, I'm being paroled. Her response was an outpouring of emotion. Oh my God, Ben, when? What time? I can't believe this, I'm so happy. Her voice broke with tears. 2 weeks later, I walked out of those gates, finally free. Tiffany was there, radiant and beaming, waiting with open arms. She'd traded her old car for a sleek new one and looked more beautiful than I remembered. She ran to me, tears glistening as we embraced, and I found my own cheeks wet with emotion. We headed to her parents' house, where a giant "Welcome Home, Daddy" banner greeted me. The kids had made it, and when I held them, I saw how much they had grown. It had been 3 years since I last saw them outside of pictures. My mother-in-law's hug was warm and full of forgiveness, and my father-in-law's handshake was firm and sincere. Friends from our past dropped by throughout the day, but I couldn't bring myself to stray far from Tiffany's side. That evening I turned to her and asked, "Where should I sleep?" She grinned and said, "In our bed, of course. We moved it downstairs for some privacy. Dad's idea. But tonight we're going to a motel. I've been saving 3 years' worth of love for you." Her words were all I needed. The future stretched before us, a blank slate waiting to be filled with better days. Together we were finally ready to begin again. "I've missed you so deeply," she admitted in a hushed tone. The party had dwindled. Most of the guests were gone. After saying goodnight to the kids, Tiffany commented that we'd see everyone again the next day. I found it amusing. There was no mystery about where we were headed or what was about to unfold. Wandering toward the closet, I felt curious and peeked inside to see if I'd left anything behind. Opening a drawer, I spotted a blonde wig neatly tucked away. Just as I examined it, Tiffany appeared, noticing where my attention had landed. "Oh, that," she said with a soft laugh. "I bought it on a whim and tried it once. Turns out I'm more of a brunette at heart." Her smile was playful and warm. She motioned toward a few drawers where she had carefully stored some of my things. I picked out a fresh set of clothes and gathered a couple of essentials for our trip to the motel. As we headed out, we talked about what lay ahead. One thing was clear: no more avoiding the issues in our lives. We'd confront everything directly, together. Our future would be transparent, free of secrets, full of connection. At the motel, we decided to start the evening with a drink. Tiffany glowed as she waited at a table, while I went to the bar to place our order. As I returned, I noticed a man had approached her, sliding into the seat beside her. Their conversation caught my attention from a distance. "Hey there, gorgeous," the man began smoothly. "Here by yourself?" Tiffany's response was calm but firm. "Please leave. I'm married, and I'm waiting for my husband. I'm asking you nicely." The man, undeterred, leaned closer. "Why should I be worried about your husband, darling?" Her voice never wavered. "Ben, love, can you come here for a second?" she called out, her tone deliberate. As soon as the man spotted me approaching, his entire demeanor changed. He stumbled over his words. "Oh, my bad. Sorry about that. Thought you were someone else." Without another word, he bolted for the exit. Puzzled, I watched him leave. "What was that about?" I asked, still processing the odd encounter. Tiffany chuckled, looking up at me. "Honey, your reputation precedes you. Around here, just mentioning that I'm married to Ben O'Brien is enough to send people running. You're still infamous, you know. And well, the whole Anthony thing hasn't exactly been forgotten. Later, in our room, Tiffany turned to me with a playful smile. So, she asked, what's your plan? I didn't need to think. Quick and intense to get all the tension out. Then, slow and gentle. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. As she began undressing, I followed suit. We climbed into bed, and her touch sent a surge of warmth through me. I needed this just as much as you did, she whispered. Afterward, she rose, her movements delicate as she headed toward the bathroom, murmuring about freshening up before round 2. The sound of the shower filled the room as I poured us each a drink. Setting the glasses on the nightstand, I joined her in the warm cascade of water. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, I handed her one of the glasses. To us, I toasted. To the woman I love. May we never be apart. She smiled as we clinked glasses. With a gentle motion, I pulled the towel from her and eased her onto the bed. Her expression was one of pure contentment, her satisfaction unmistakable. I love you, Ben, she said softly. Tonight was more than enough to make up for the past 6 months. Now we have so much to look forward to. I couldn't help but grin back. Epilogue. In the weeks that followed, I landed a job as a welder with a reputable company. During the interview, my new boss emphasized the value of second chances for employees who showed up on time, stayed clean, and worked hard. He also mentioned that I came highly recommended, though he never disclosed who had put in the good word. After months of diligent effort and careful saving, we finally secured a home of our own. It wasn't just any rental. It came with the option to purchase, symbolizing a fresh chapter in our lives. Conveniently, it was located in the same neighborhood as Tiffany's parents. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of stability, a step toward becoming a complete family again. One afternoon, we found ourselves outside a warehouse where Lieutenant Scott and Officer Ryan, accompanied by 2 others, were waiting. Their presence was stern and purposeful, backed by a search warrant. It was clear what they were after: a Luger. The officers began combing through boxes with meticulous determination. I tried to catch Tiffany's eye, but the officers swiftly separated us. Eventually, one officer emerged, holding a Luger carefully encased in a plastic evidence bag. He handed it to the lieutenant with a grim expression. Lieutenant Scott turned his attention to Tiffany and asked pointedly, "Mrs. O'Brien, didn't you say you don't allow firearms in your home?" Tiffany, calm but resolute, replied, "This isn't my home, Lieutenant, it's a warehouse." His response, while curt, was laden with implication. "Well, I suggest you stay close to home while we run tests on this Luger." With that, they left, leaving a cloud of unease in their wake. Once we were alone, I confronted Tiffany. "I thought you got rid of that gun. What are we supposed to do now?" She stared at me, incredulous. "What do you mean, do? Ben, you think I killed Anthony? Are you serious? I didn't kill anyone. I don't even know who did." Tiffany insisted the gun had slipped her mind entirely until the officers unearthed it. The next day, Lieutenant Scott visited us at our new house, holding the Luger once again. To our shock, he returned it. "The serial number's been erased," he explained. "It's also missing a striker, which means it's non-functional. It hasn't been fired in years." Tiffany made her stance clear. "I don't want it. Keep it. Throw it away. I don't care. Guns have no place in my house." She speculated that it might have belonged to the movers, but was certain it wasn't hers. After this unsettling episode, life slowly regained its rhythm. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized how crucial open communication was to avoid such misunderstandings. Tiffany admitted her mistrust had caused unnecessary strain, and I recognized the importance of being more transparent. Divorce had loomed as an option, but we agreed it would have wasted everything we'd worked for. Surprisingly, our relationship rekindled, and the intimacy we'd shared in the early days of our marriage began to return. Unspoken understandings emerged between us. Tiffany knew I wouldn't betray her, just as she understood the severe consequences of betraying me. When we went out with friends, I couldn't help but laugh at the way everyone sought my permission to dance with Tiffany. It seemed I was becoming something of a local legend. A month ago, an unexpected call from Lieutenant Scott brought closure. He informed us we were no longer under suspicion for Anthony's murder. The real culprit had been found. Sue, a woman from the bar. Sue had been infatuated with Anthony and had even slept with him. But beneath her charm lay a sinister truth. She was a black widow, seducing men and killing them when her interest waned. The breakthrough came during another case involving an unfaithful husband. While questioning him at a bar, the police encountered Sue. A search of her car revealed a blonde wig and a Luger. Faced with the evidence, Sue confessed not only to Anthony's murder but to 3 others. Her victims were all married men who had cheated on their spouses. Her spree had begun in Atlanta, where her own husband was found dead behind a bar. The revelation sent shivers down my spine. It was a sobering thought. Had I ever strayed from Tiffany, I might have met a grim fate at the hands of Sue in some shadowy alley. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.